I was his wife. That's the part the papers never say. In the headlines, he's always the beast, il capo dei capi, the man who turned Sicily into a graveyard and made judges into targets. They write his name in black ink and red numbers: victims, years, sentences. Salvatore, Toto, Riina. They talk about bombs, ambushes, blood on asphalt. They never talk about how he took his coffee, or how he laughed when he was still just a boy from Corleone with dust on his shoes and nothing in his pockets but fury. They never talk about me. So I'll tell you, this isn't a defense. There is none. This is a confession, not of his crimes, of mine. 1. The boy from Corleone. When you marry a man like Salvatore Riina, the first thing you learn is this: the monster comes later. First, he is just a boy from a town built on stone and silence, a boy who smells like earth and cigarettes, a boy who looks at the world like it owes him something, and if it doesn't pay up, he'll take it. I met him on a Sunday, after Mass. I was 17, wearing a white dress I'd sewn myself, the hem slightly crooked because my hands kept shaking. It was the first time I'd been allowed to go to the piazza alone, without my mother hovering behind me like a shadow with a rosary. The church bells were still ringing when I stepped onto the square. Men clustered in little knots, smoking and arguing about politics they didn't understand, and football teams they loved like sons. Women in black dresses walked straight from God to the market, bargaining over tomatoes with the same ferocity they prayed with. And then there was him. He was leaning against the corner of the bar, arms crossed, watching everything like it was all a show being put on just for him. Short, stocky, thick neck, face like carved stone, but eyes. My God, his eyes. Sharp and restless, always moving, always counting. I'd seen him before, of course. Everyone knew the Riina boy, the one whose father had died in an accident at the sulfur mines, leaving behind more debts than memories. The one who'd left school too early, who ran errands for men whose names were never spoken above a whisper. But that day, he looked at me, and I made the first mistake of my life. I looked back. Our eyes met across the square, just for a second, long enough. He straightened, flicked his cigarette to the ground, and walked toward me with the easy, dangerous confidence of someone who has already decided how the conversation will end. "Buongiorno," he said. "You're Maria Baglio, right?" I should have lied. Instead, I nodded. He smiled. Not big. Just a little twist at the corner of his mouth, like he'd found a secret. "I'm Toto," as if I didn't know. "I know," I said, then cursed myself for sounding too eager. He laughed softly, eyes staying on my face a fraction too long. "Going to the market?" he asked. "Yes. Let me carry that." He took the basket from my hand before I could protest, his fingers brushing mine. They were calloused, hot from the cigarette. I felt the touch all the way up my arm. "My mother," I started. "Will be happy you're not walking alone," he finished. "There are wolves in this town." He said it like a joke. I didn't know then that he was talking about himself. We walked side by side through the market. Women watched us from under scarves and hats, eyes sharp as knives, cutting us into pieces. His reputation, my family, our names, Men nodded at him with that particular nod, reserved for young men on the rise. He talked easily about nothing and everything. How old are you? 17. You look younger. You look older. I am older. He told me about his dream, not the kind you talk about in confession. The land, he said, nodding toward the hills that rose beyond the town. All of that should belong to us, not to some baron in Palermo who's never touched the soil. He spoke with a heat that made my breath catch. My father broke his back so that man could buy his third car, he continued. And when my father died, they gave my mother nothing. Not a penny. Not even a letter. I'm sorry, I said. He shrugged like it didn't matter, but his jaw tightened. One day, he said quietly, they'll answer for that. The way he said it made the hairs on my arms stand up, not because I was afraid, because I believed him. You have to understand, in Corleone, justice doesn't come in uniforms. It doesn't come from judges or papers or stamps. It comes from men like him. That's what I thought back then. 2. The wedding dress and the warning. We married 2 years later. By then, his name wasn't just whispers, it was weight. He walked down the street and men stepped aside. He entered a bar and chairs scraped back. People said buonasera with a little bow in their shoulders, like they were lowering themselves to make more room for his presence. My father didn't like it. He's dangerous, he told me in the kitchen, voice low so my mother wouldn't hear and faint on the spot. You know what kind of men he works for. He works hard, I protested. He brings home money. He takes care of his mother. Money from where? He snapped. From whom? You think it's from selling oranges? Papa. He grabbed my shoulders, fingers tight. Listen to me, Maria, he said. Men like him don't stop where they are. They keep going, and when they fall, they don't fall alone. They take everyone with them. I love him, I whispered. My father closed his eyes, like I'd stabbed him. Love is not enough, he said. Not with men like that. But love was all I had. And Toto. Toto made me feel seen in a town where women existed in doorways and shadows. With him, I wasn't just the Baglio girl. I was Maria. He said my name like it was a promise. So, I married him. On the morning of our wedding, my mother pinned a veil in my hair, and my aunt whispered something in my ear as she adjusted my dress. Marrying a man like him, she said, is like lighting a candle in a room full of dynamite. Auntie? Pray, she said simply. Every day, to keep the flame small. I laughed it off. When you're 19, you think you can handle fire. The church was full. All of Corleone, it felt like. The air was hot and thick with incense and curiosity. I walked down the aisle on my father's arm. He held me like he didn't want to let go, like he knew he was handing me to a man and a fate he couldn't protect me from. Toto waited at the altar in a suit that didn't quite fit, but somehow made him look larger. He watched me the whole way, eyes burning, smile small but real. When the priest asked if I took this man to be my husband, I said sí, without hesitation. When he repeated the question to Toto, he didn't answer right away. He looked at me, really looked, as if he were deciding something. Then he nodded once, sharp, like a man sealing a deal. "See," he said. The ladies in the second row sighed. One whispered, "What a handsome couple." They didn't see the way his eyes flickered, just for a second, toward the back of the church where three older men in dark suits stood apart from the rest, watching everything with expressionless faces. I saw. I just didn't understand. 3. Little houses, little lies. Our first home was a small house on a dusty road outside town. 2 rooms, low ceiling, a patch of land out back where I planted basil and tomatoes because I wanted something clean growing in our lives. We were poor, but not like my parents had been. We had meat twice a week, real meat, not just bones for soup. We had wine that didn't come in reused bottles with handwritten labels. We had a radio. "See?" Toto would say, catching me smiling at the little pleasures. "Already better." He was sweet, then. People don't like to hear that. They want the monster from the start. But he could be soft with me, with his mother, with children who ran up to him in the street. He made me coffee every morning, strong, black, sweet, the way I liked it. He'd kiss my neck as I stood at the stove, his hands slipping around my waist. One day, he'd whisper, "We'll have a house with a view of the sea." "We can't even see the town from here," I'd laugh. "Just wait." He was gone most nights. "Business," he'd say when he kissed my forehead and grabbed his jacket. "What business?" I'd ask. "The only kind that matters," he'd reply. "The kind that makes sure you never scrub floors for other people, the way my mother had to." Sometimes he came home with bruises, a split lip, scraped knuckles. Car trouble, he'd tell me. We didn't have a car. The lies started small, like pebbles at the edge of a cliff. One night, he came home late, shirt stained. Not with blood, but with something dark and oily, like dirt and sweat. I touched his sleeve. "What happened?" "Nothing." "This isn't nothing." He smiled, tired. "You sound like my mother." "Maybe she's right." He turned. "Fast!" "About what?" "That you're getting involved in things you shouldn't." Silence dropped between us like a curtain. He stepped closer. Close enough that I could see the tiny flecks of gold in his brown irises. "What did she tell you?" he asked quietly. "Nothing," I said. "She doesn't have to." "People talk." "People always talk," he snapped. "They talk when you're poor. They talk when you're rich. They talk when you keep your head down. They talk when you stand up. The difference is now, when they talk about me, they lower their voices." He said it with a pride that made my stomach twist. "Toto! I just—" He grabbed my chin, not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to make my words stop. "Listen, Maria," he said, "what I do for us, for our future children, for your parents, for my mother, so she doesn't die scrubbing toilets for the same people who step on her in the street. There are men in this town who have had everything for generations. Land, money, power. They keep us crawling. I'm just balancing the scales." "It's illegal," I whispered. He shrugged. "So is stealing bread when you're hungry." "It's not the same." "Maybe not to you," he said. "You always had food." I didn't. He let go of my face and stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "Do you love me?" he asked suddenly. "Yes," I said without thinking. Then trust me, he replied, and don't ask questions you don't want answers to. That line should have been another warning. Instead, I took it as a promise. I thought I was being loyal. Really, I was learning how to look away. 4. Becoming La Signora. As Toto rose, I rose with him. Not in my own right. We don't get to do that, women from places like mine. We rise as wives, as mothers, as quiet shadows behind loud men. But even shadows change size when the light moves. The more powerful he became, the more people treated me differently. Buongiorno, signora, the butcher would say, slipping an extra cut into my paper-wrapped parcel. No charge, the grocer would insist, refusing my coins. For you, please. It's an honor. Come, sit, the hairdresser would gush, guiding me to the best chair. Let me do your hair. You must look your best, with such an important husband. Important. They never said dangerous. Not to my face. At weddings, I sat closer to the front. At funerals, people watched to see where I stood. Whispers followed me like perfume. That's his wife. Poor thing. Lucky thing. Depends how you look at it. I had children. 2 boys, then a girl. Their names don't matter here. They've suffered enough from his. He adored them. That's another part no one likes. The monster as a father. He'd put our eldest on his shoulders and march around the yard, making lion noises. He'd pick flowers with our little girl and braid them into crowns, clumsier than anything I could make. He'd sit at the table and help with homework, patient, focused, the same intensity he used for everything. You're good with them, I told him once, watching him explain a math problem to our middle boy. He shrugged, but his eyes softened. They're mine, he said simply. No one touches what's mine. Protective, possessive. In his mind, they were the same. The more powerful he became, the more I noticed the gaps between who he was at home and who he was outside. Inside, husband, father. Outside, something else. He'd leave at night wearing one face and come back wearing another. Sometimes his hands shook. Are you cold? I'd ask, offering him a sweater. He'd look at me like I'd spoken another language. No, he'd say, just wired. I didn't know it then, but those nights usually followed something terrible. A bombing, a shooting, a message written in blood. Someone else would have to scrub off the street. I'd hear about it on the radio the next day. Another attack in Palermo, a judge killed, a car bomb. And my heart would stop for a second, then start again. Because it wasn't him, never him. Always unknown assailants, masked men, those people. Never. The man in my kitchen, drinking espresso with a steady hand. You can survive anything if you don't connect the dots. I became very good at not connecting them. 5. The judges on the television. His war with the state didn't happen all at once. It built slowly, like the tension before a summer storm. First, it was little skirmishes, arrests, raids. Men we knew being taken away in handcuffs and coming back, months later, thinner, angrier. The judges are getting brave, the men at bar whispered. They think they can break us. He'd sit with them, listen, say little. Then came the trials. Maxi trials, they called them. Dozens of men in cages, judges reading long lists of crimes, prosecutors naming names that used to only be spoken in kitchens and back rooms. We watched it on television. It was surreal, seeing our world translated into the language of courts and cameras. There was one judge they hated more than the rest, Giovanni Falcone. I remember his face on the screen, calm, serious, eyes tired but determined. "He's brave," I said once, without thinking. The room went icy. Toto turned his head slowly, eyes narrowing. "He's suicidal," he said. "There's a difference." "He's trying to clean up the country," I replied. "Is that so bad?" "The country?" he scoffed. "These men don't care about the country. They care about careers, about appearing on television. They build their names by destroying ours." "Ours?" I repeated. "You make it sound like you're politicians." "We are more than that," he said, quietly. "They have laws on paper. We have the law of the land, of blood, of respect." "Respect?" I echoed. "Is that what you call it when people are too afraid to say no to you?" He looked at me, long and hard. Then he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Careful, Maria," he said. "You sound like them." I dropped it, but the seed was planted. Soon, the judges didn't just exist on the screen. They existed in our conversations. "They won't stop," he'd say, pacing the living room. "They think they can humiliate us, lock us in cages like animals, make us kneel." Then maybe stop giving them reasons to, I thought, but didn't say. You don't argue with a storm when it's already spinning. 6. The Road by the Sea. I remember the day Falcone died, the way other people remember where they were when the moon landing happened. I was hanging laundry, white sheets flapping lazily in the warm breeze, the sun making the world bright and small. The radio was playing some stupid pop song, my youngest humming along off-key as she chased a chicken across the yard. "Stay away from its beak," I called absent-mindedly. Inside the house, the phone rang. "Get it!" I shouted to no one in particular, hands full of clothespins. It stopped, then started again, more insistently. I sighed, wiped my hands on my apron, and went inside. "Pronto?" I said. "Turn on the television," my sister's voice said, shaky. "What? Why?" "Just turn it on, Maria." I did. Static. Then the news. Chaos. A highway outside Palermo, the asphalt ripped open like a wound. Smoke, fire, twisted metal. Reporters shouting over each other. Words that didn't make sense at first. Explosive device. Judge Giovanni Falcone, his wife, and 3 bodyguards. Killed instantly. I stood there, hand still on the TV knob. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't think of the judge first. I thought of the conversations at our table, the way Toto's voice had gone quiet and deadly whenever Falcone's name came up. "Someone will teach him his place," one of his men had said once, laughing. Toto hadn't laughed. He'd just smiled that small, sharp smile he had when plans were being made. My knees felt weak. I sank onto the couch without meaning to. My daughter ran in, hair wild, cheeks flushed from play. "Mama, the chicken. She stopped when she saw my face. Mama? What's wrong? Nothing, amore, I lied, pulling her close. Nothing at all. That night, the house was full. Men came and went, the air thick with cigarette smoke and whispers. Did you hear? They say half a ton of explosives. On the highway! Like something from a war. Now they'll know we're serious. I stayed in the kitchen, hands busy with coffee and plates, ears straining. No one said his name. Not in connection with it, not directly. But they looked at him differently, with something like awe, something like fear. He basked in it. He was calm, too calm. Sitting at the head of the table, body relaxed, eyes watchful. Our eldest son watched him like he always did. Adoration and horror, fighting for space on his young face. Go to bed, I told the kids. We're not sleepy, they protested. Now, I insisted. Later, when the house finally emptied, I found him in the yard, smoking, looking up at the stars like they'd personally offended him. Did you do it? I asked. He didn't turn. Do you want me to say yes? He replied. So you can hate me for something real, instead of something you only suspect. Don't joke, I snapped. People died. People die every day, he said. In mines, in fields, in hospitals. No one cares. One judge dies, and suddenly, the whole country weeps. They killed his wife, too, I whispered. That's what happens when you sit next to men who make enemies, he said, coldly. I stared at him. What about me? I asked. I sit next to you. He finally turned. For a second, vulnerability flashed across his face. The boy from the piazza, the one who talked about land and justice. I would never let anything happen to you, he said. It sounded like a promise. It felt like a threat. I realized then, whatever line he'd once had, whatever limit, he'd crossed it. And he wasn't going back. 7. The monster in the headlines. They arrested him in 1993. By then, his name was everywhere. Not just in Corleone, not just in Sicily, not just in Italy. Everywhere. The boss of bosses. Il capo dei capi. The beast. Newspapers printed his face in grainy black and white, sometimes younger, sometimes older, always with the same eyes. People talked about him in bars in Rome, in cafes in Milan. They spoke his name like a curse, or like a legend, sometimes both. At home, he was still just Toto. He still drank his coffee the same way. Still kissed my cheek when he walked in the door. Still put his hand on our daughter's head in blessing every time he left. Like he could protect her from things he had unleashed on the world. But the net was closing. Even I could see that. More arrests, more trials, more men breaking the code of silence, turning on each other to save their own skins. Pentity, they called them. The repentant ones. He spat the word like poison. Cowards, he snarled at the TV when one of them testified. They eat at your table, kiss your cheeks, then run to the judges and cry like children. Maybe they're tired, I ventured once. Of what? Of blood. Something flickered in his eyes. He lit another cigarette instead of answering. The night they took him, it was raining. I remember because I just complained about the damp in the walls. The house in Palermo wasn't like the one in Corleone. Bigger, yes, fancier, but older, too, with pipes that clanged and ghosts that creaked in the floors. He'd gone out in the afternoon, as usual. Meetings, I assumed. I'd long stopped asking where. He came back just after sunset. "Good day?" I asked, handing him a towel for his hair. "We'll see," he said. We ate dinner, pasta, salad, bread. The normalcy of it feels obscene now. Our youngest told some silly joke she'd heard at school. He laughed, a real laugh. The sound stuck in my chest. After dinner, he went to the living room to watch the news. I washed dishes. The first siren I thought was on TV. The second, closer, made me look up. Lights flashed against the kitchen window. Blue, red, blue, red. Like the inside of my eyelids when I closed them too tight. "Maria!" he shouted from the other room. I ran in. He was standing, remote in hand, eyes on the door. The sirens cut off. Silence, then the thunder of boots on stairs. "Polizia!" "Aprit!" "Open up." He looked at me, not angry, not scared, resigned. "It was always going to end like this," he said, quietly. "No," I whispered. "No, it can't." He grabbed my face, kissed my forehead. "Take care of them," he said. "Whatever they say about me, you know who I am." Before I could answer, the door burst open. Men in uniforms and plain clothes flooded in, guns drawn, voices overlapping. "Salvatore Riina, you are under arrest." I don't remember the words. I remember the metal glinting in the dim light, the smell of wet wool and sweat, my daughter screaming, my son trying to push toward his father and being held back. I remember his hands behind his back, metal around his wrists. I remember his eyes on mine as they led him out, still calm, still dark, still his. The cameras were waiting outside. They always are for men like him. Flashes lit up the street as they pushed him into the car. Neighbors peered from windows. Some crossed themselves, some just watched, faces unreadable. On the TV that night, they replayed the footage again and again. The reporter's voice was breathless. After 23 years on the run, after hundreds of murders, after a reign of terror that has scarred Sicily and Italy for decades, Salvatore Toto Riina has been arrested in Palermo. They showed the car, the handcuffs, the bowed head. They called him a monster. For the first time, I saw what they saw. Not the boy from Corleone, not the husband who bought me a radio, not the father who braided flowers into our daughter's hair. Something else. Something made of violence and choice and power. And I realized, with a clarity so sharp it was almost relief. They were right. Visiting hours. Prison. Changes a man. But not always the way you think. The first time I went to see him, there were reporters outside the gates, shouting questions I didn't answer. "Signora Riina, do you feel responsible for what he did? Did you know? Are you ashamed? Do you still love him?" That last one caught me. I didn't answer that either. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and old stone. They searched my bag, my pockets, my shoes. They made me walk through metal detectors like a criminal. They stamped my wrist with ink that wouldn't wash off for 2 days. "Room 3, the guard grunted. 20 minutes. He was already there when I walked in, sitting at a small metal table bolted to the floor, hands cuffed in front of him. The orange of his prison uniform looked wrong on him. Too bright, too obvious. He looked older, smaller, but his eyes were the same. "Maria," he said, standing halfway, chains clinking. "You came." "What did you expect?" I asked, sitting opposite him. "Nothing," he said. "Everything. I don't know." We stared at each other. The metal table a ridiculous thin barrier between a life we'd shared and a life we were living now. The silence stretched. "You look well," he said finally. I laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Well?" I repeated. "Your husband is the most hated man in Italy. Our children are being followed home from school by reporters, and our neighbors cross the street when they see us. Yes, I'm wonderful." He flinched. "I did what I had to do," he said. "I'm not here to talk about what you did," I said. "The judges will do that." "The newspapers." "Then why are you here?" "Because you're my husband," I said. "Because for 30 years, I slept next to you. Because I need to know if any of it was real." He looked genuinely surprised. "Of course it was," he said. "What kind of question is that?" "A necessary one," I replied. "When you find out your life was built on blood, you start to wonder about the foundation." He leaned forward, chains scraping. "Maria," he said quietly, "I never lied to you about loving you. Or the children. Everything I did with you in mind." "With me in mind?" I repeated, voice rising. "When you blew up those men on the highway? When you ordered those shootings? When you buried bodies in the country? You were thinking of me?" His eyes hardened. "You talk like them," he said. "Like the judges. The journalists. You don't understand our world." "Our world?" I snapped. "Our world is supposed to be our home, our family, not your war." He sat back, jaw clenched. "You knew who I was when you married me," he said. "No," I whispered. "That's just it." I thought I did. I married a poor boy with anger in his heart, not a man who would turn that anger into mass murder. He looked away. "I did what needed to be done," he muttered. "For respect. For power. For us." "For us?" I repeated. "Look where for us ended." We sat in silence. Finally, I asked the question I'd been afraid of since the day they took him. "Was there a moment," I said softly, "when you felt anything? Guilt? Doubt?" He was quiet for so long, I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "Once." It knocked the air from my lungs. "When?" I whispered. He didn't look at me. "There was a man," he said slowly. "A good man. Not clean, but less dirty. He tried to make peace between us and the state. He thought he could build a bridge. He was naive. He had a little girl. He swallowed. The night before we dealt with him," he continued, "I saw him in a restaurant with his family. He was holding his daughter on his lap, making her laugh. For a second, I thought of our girls, of you, of what it would be like if someone decided I had to die and didn't care who they hurt to do it." "And?" I asked, barely breathing. "And then I reminded myself that if I didn't do it, someone else would," he finished. "And that weakness gets you killed." "Is that what you call weakness?" I asked. "Humanity?" "You can't be human in my position," he said. You can be feared, or you can be dead. There's nothing in between. That's not true, I snapped. There's always a choice. He looked at me like I was a child. Maybe for you, he said. Not for me. The guard tapped on the glass. Time, he said. We stood slowly. He reached for my hand, chains clinking. I hesitated. Then I took it. Warm, calloused, familiar. You can hate me, he said quietly. Everyone else does. Just don't let them make you forget I am a person, not just a headline. I pulled my hand back. That's the problem, Toto, I said. What? You are a person, I replied, and you chose to become what you became. I walked out without looking back. Outside, the reporters were waiting again. Signora Riina, how is your husband? Do you feel guilty? Do you think he deserves to die in prison? I pushed past them. One question lingered in the air. Did you know what he was? A young journalist shouted. Or are you a victim too? I stopped, turned. Everyone leaned in. Cameras, microphones, breathless attention. I thought of all the years I'd told myself I didn't know enough to judge. All the nights I'd pushed doubt out of my mind like a draft through a window. All the little lies I'd accepted because they came wrapped in love and necessity. Was I a victim? Yes. Was I innocent? Number. I was his wife, I said. Then I walked away. 9. Being his widow. While he still breathed. He lived a long time in prison, longer than most men would, with that much hatred pointed at them. Life, they call it. Ergastolo. But for him, even behind bars, there was power. Messages smuggled, orders given. A system that reached through concrete and bars and still made people kneel. For me, there was just life. Without him. We moved back to a small town, not Corleone. Somewhere people could pretend not to know our name even though they did. The children grew up in whispers. Don't play with them. Their father is... Stay away from that house. Those people are... I watched my sons wrestle with his shadow. Who were they? His blood or their own choices? One wanted to run as far away as possible. To the north, to cities where Riina was just a story on TV, not a ghost at the dinner table. The other, for a while, seemed pulled toward his father's gravity. Angry, proud, talking about respect and family, with the same poisoned language. We fought, we cried, we kept moving. People ask, in those rare moments when they're brave enough to ask anything, why I stayed married to him, even after the arrests, the trials, the life sentence. Why I visited, why I took his calls, why I didn't run and change my name and pretend I'd never known him. I don't have an answer that will satisfy them. How do you explain 30 years? How do you explain the way love and horror can coexist in one heart, like two enemies sharing a house out of necessity? He was a monster. He was also the man who held me when my father died, who knew exactly how I liked my coffee, who could tell by my breathing whether I was truly asleep or just pretending so he'd stop talking about work. Human beings are not one thing, not even the worst ones. That's the terrible, terrifying truth. Because if he is not just a monster, If he is a man who became a monster, then I am not just his victim. I am a woman who watched him rise, who heard the rumors, saw the bruises, smelled the smoke, who chose, again and again, not to look directly at what he was doing, because the cost of seeing felt too high. And when the police came, when the judges spoke, when the country pointed at him and said, "You are our nightmare," I had to look in the mirror and ask, "Who am I?" 10. The last call. He died in 2017. By then, he was more myth than man. Old, sick, imprisoned for decades. The beast in a bed. They called me from the prison hospital. "Signora," the voice on the other end said, "it's time." I went. Not because I forgave him, not because I forgot, because there is a part of me that will always be the 19-year-old girl in the white dress, walking down the aisle toward a boy from Corleone with dust on his shoes and fire in his eyes. They let me into his room. No chains now, just tubes, machines, the soft hiss of oxygen. He looked small. So small. The man who'd blown up roads now struggled to breathe in a white room with peeling paint. His eyes were closed. I stepped closer. "Toto," I said. He opened them. For a moment, they were clear. "Maria," he croaked. I sat. We looked at each other for a long time. What do you say to a man like that when the end is so close? Do you ask for apologies? Do you curse him? Do you sit in silence and let the weight of 3 decades of blood and love press down on your lungs? I chose something else. "Do you regret it?" I asked quietly. "All of it." He stared at the ceiling. "For you," he said finally. "Yes." "And for them?" I pressed. "The others." He closed his eyes. "I can't think about them," he whispered. "If I do, I cannot breathe." It wasn't enough. It never would be. But it was the closest thing to repentance I would ever get. I took his hand. It was lighter now, bones and skin. "I loved you," I said. "I know," he replied. "It was the only good thing I ever had." The machine beeped. His chest rose, fell, once, twice, and then it didn't. The nurse stepped forward. I stood up. I walked out. Outside, the sky was a perfect blue. People were going about their day, buying bread, honking horns, arguing over parking spaces. The world did not stop. It never does. The news broke an hour later. Toto Riina, the boss of bosses, is dead. They talked about victims, numbers, trials. They showed old footage of him being arrested, young and defiant. They showed nothing of the man in the hospital bed. They showed nothing of the woman who sat with him as he died. That's why I'm telling you this. Not to make you pity me. I don't deserve it. Not to make you forgive him. He doesn't deserve it. But because behind every monster the world creates headlines for, there are rooms, kitchens, bedrooms, backyards. There are wives and mothers and children learning in real time how to live with a shadow that doesn't belong entirely to them, but falls over them anyway. I was his wife. I watched him rise. And when the police came, I realized I had married a monster. But here's the truth I've been running from for years. Monsters are made of people. and the people around them, the ones who love them, fear them, excuse them. We are made of choices. My crime was not pulling a trigger, planting a bomb, ordering a hit. My crime was simpler, quieter. I closed my eyes. I saw the blood on the news and told myself it wasn't mine to wash away. I listened to his justifications and told myself it wasn't my place to judge. I accepted the gifts, the houses, the meat on the table, and told myself it was simply the price of survival. I married a monster, but I stayed with him. That's my sentence. One the law can't give. One I carry myself. If you're watching this, listening to me, shaking your head thinking, I would never. I hope you're right. But remember this. Monsters don't show you their teeth on the first date. They show you their wounds, their charm, their hunger. They tell you stories about childhoods full of hunger and humiliation. They talk about justice. They make you feel special. By the time you see the claws, you've already built them a home in your heart. And then, one day, the sirens come, and you have to decide in a single breath who you really are. That, more than anything, is what this story is about. Not him, me, and the choice I finally made, too late, at a kitchen table surrounded by police and questions. I was his wife, I told them, and now you know what that meant.